Some time ago, an art sales agent reached out to me asking if I could design a special map for a hotel in Dubai. So I designed a unique map that was painted black using Japanese ink and finished with 24-karat gold leaf. The basic idea was to create an artwork that would incorporate a map of the area while also including an intriguing detail. We agreed on a black and gold color scheme. The final concept was to use a dense pattern of square shapes as a middle layer covering the gold behind it. When looking straight at the artwork, the gold layer is visible, but when viewed from the side, the pattern hides it. This creates an effect where the artwork changes depending on the viewer's angle. For example, if you are walking through the hotel lobby and glance at the artwork, at first it might seem like a most black object hanging on the wall. But as you get closer and view it from the front, the golden layer gradually reveals itself. The elements of the map are laser cut. Each layer of plywood needs to be sanded down. I use fine sandpaper up to 240 grit to achieve a very smooth surface. This removes any dirt from the plywood and eliminates all imperfections. The first step after sanding is painting the back layer with black color. For this I use Japanese liquid ink, which is a fantastic material because it contains a lot of pigment and provides excellent coverage. However, to achieve a consistent color, it's best to apply several layers. I paint only where it's necessary, in the places where the water will be visible on the map. Additionally, the edges of the map must also be painted black to ensure the regular finish. It's quite a time-consuming process, but it's essential to make sure that everything is painted in the consistent deep color. Once the ink dries, everything is sealed with a clear coat to prevent the ink from fading and to protect it from potential physical damage. This step requires great precision. The larger surfaces are coated with a roller, while edges are painted with a brush. The finish creates a nice visual effect with a subtle shine. Finally, the two layers can be joined together, the black painted back layer and the land layer. At this stage, I glue them together. The glue needs to be applied very evenly across the entire surface, and a generous amount is used to ensure a strong bond. Then I leave it overnight under heavy weights, basically every heavy object I can find in the workshop, to make sure it is properly secured. Finally, the most exciting part, that is adding the gold leaf to the map. First, I mark the margin that doesn't need to be glided, as this area will later be covered by the wooden frame, which will hide the section of this map. Applying gold leaf is quite a challenging task for me. I've done it a few times and there's always a moment when some things go wrong. It's all about timing and skill, figuring out the perfect moment to apply the gold. For the gold leaf I use oil, which must first be applied to the surface where the gold will be placed. The waiting time before the gold can be applied after painting the surface with oil is about half an hour to, let's say, 2 hours. During this time, the oil's thickness and thickness change as it starts to absorb into the wood, becoming less sticky. This makes it incredibly difficult to properly attach the gold leaf because at a certain point it becomes too dry and the gold starts cracking. Maybe there's some gold leaf expert out there who could give me a few extra tips on this process, but for now I'm just learning and experimenting. I basically covered the entire map with oil, which, as it turned out, was not the best idea. Applying the gold leaf takes quite a lot of time because each piece has to be carefully placed one by one. At some point, I realized that the adhesive was no longer in the best condition for the next layer, but of course, I only found out that later. The gold leaf I used is from the brand called Giustomenetti, which is an Italian company. They make really high quality gold leaf and the packaging is great. It comes in a small box and inside the sheets are arranged in a booklet page by page. The leaf itself is quite delicate, but actually it's pretty easy to work with it because it's attached to thin paper sheets. This makes handling much simpler. So I started applying the gold leaf one by one and it turned out great. The process was quite time consuming because every single sheet had to be pressed down carefully to make sure it adhered properly to the plywood and that there was enough glue underneath. I started with the larger areas as they were easy to cover and then moved on to the sections where the water was cut out. Step by step, the whole surface was covered. I made a small overlap of about 2-3 millimeters between each sheet, which I later pressed down to ensure everything blended together smoothly. Once all the gold was applied, I trimmed the edges, and the excess gold that extended over the water section was carefully cut out with a knife. Since I wanted the edges to remain black, I had to make sure no gold stuck to them. This precise cleaning of the edges was crucial because I only wanted the gold to be visible on the one specific layer without any extra bits in random places. I cut one more small piece of gold leaf. It was just a tiny piece, but I used it to press down to the spots where small gaps had formed. These happened for different reasons. Sometimes there was too much dust, sometimes too little glue, and sometimes the gold cracked with just the slightest movement. After finishing the entire surface with gold leaf, I went over the slightly loose areas, especially along the edges where one sheet overlapped another, and pressed them down again. This time, the gold stick perfectly, blending together into one seamless surface. Finally, I took a brush and cleaned all the small gaps to make sure there wasn't a single piece of stray gold left. But even at the very end, I kept finding tiny flecks of gold everywhere, all the way to the last moment. And then it was time for the next layer. I cut it as a single piece on the machine. With large elements, there are always sections that don't fully fall out, so they have to be pushed out manually later. Things happened, especially since this plywood was a bit thicker, which made it trickier to cut. It had more material inside, and of course there were more knots. While the plywood surface was excellent quality, the inner layer had knots, which made things challenging. The laser cutter struggled with knots. Sure, with high power and temperature, the laser can cut through them, but knots have a different structure than regular wood. They are much denser, packed with resin, which means they burn differently, produce more smoke, and retain a lot of heat. This can damage the surrounding area, making the cut imperfect. When the laser encounters a knot and doesn't fully cut through, I have to finish the job manually. I use a craft knife and carefully cut through the remaining wood, little by little. You can usually see the dark knot inside. It burns differently than the rest of the material, leaving a mark. The patterned layer cut out beautifully. The design turned out great, exactly as I had planned. I decided to cut it into two pieces because I was worried that if something got damaged, I would have to redo the entire thing. Also, cutting larger surfaces comes with its own set of challenges, plus it didn't fit into the machine in one piece. If I had to reposition it in the machine, there was always a risk that the alignment wouldn't be perfect and any shift or vibration would be visible, especially with the pattern like this, which is very repetitive. Even the slightest misalignment would be noticeable, and I wanted it to be flawless. I also made sure to cut them up along a line when that wouldn't be visible in the final design. So in the end, even though it contains two pieces, you wouldn't be able to tell because the seam is hidden under the next layer. Just like in the previous map, this layer came with even more challenges. Some small pieces to remove, push out, and clean up. In some areas, the laser struggled, especially where there were knots in the plywood. I had to go in, carefully cut out any damaged sections, check everything, and make sure it was perfectly clean before moving forward. And once again, the black ink takes center stage. The entire map needed to be super black, intense, bold, and uniform. Every inch of the surface had to be covered. I think I used about 4 bottles of ink for this. Every hole, every cutout, every small detail had to be painted. I used the brush to get into every narrow space, making sure the sides were black as well. I didn't want any of the burnt brown color from the laser to remain visible. The whole thing had to be deep, solid black from every angle. Then I found out a few spots that were actually really damaged. Some areas didn't have the middle or the inside layer of the plywood at all, just an empty gap. Since this layer had a very thin, delicate pattern, some parts just fell apart. I had to recut those pieces, measure them carefully, repaint them, and glue them back in place so that the repairs were almost invisible. The gold layer is very delicate, so I didn't want to glue anything directly onto it. Instead, I just placed the map in the right position using the pre-drilled holes I had prepared beforehand, and then screwed into place. This way I avoided using glue which might not stick well to the gold and most importantly could damage it. I screwed them up into the pre-prepared holes, making the whole structure much more stable and rigid. Nothing moved, nothing warped. Plywood tends to have its own internal tensions, and when several layers are glued together, then can sometimes pull in different directions. That's why screws work well. They hold everything firmly in place. At this point, I could really see the final effect, and it looked amazing. The last step was gluing down the final layer. When doing this, I had to be extra careful not to apply too much glue. If it spread out beyond the edges, I would have to clean it up. Once everything was properly aligned, I pressed it down firmly to ensure a solid bond. The entire piece was then left overnight, lightly clamped to dry completely and set in place. The map needed a key element marking the hotel building. I thought it should be something unique. I was hesitating between a gold cube, a kind of architectural block representing buildings, though not exactly a replica of the actual structure. It was quite an interesting and honestly a complex idea, how to reflect the architecture in such a small detail. I was torn between a gold cube and a white one, and honestly, I wasn't sure which one to choose. But in the end, the gold cube turned out to be the perfect choice. It fits like a gem, almost like a candy piece placed onto the map. I think it adds another focal point to the entire artwork, another layer of depth. The building itself is made from an additional layer of plywood, making it slightly raised and standing out above the rest. And because of that, when the whole map is completely black, the building shines like a little crystal when viewed from the angle. In the end, I was honestly surprised by the final effect. I wasn't completely sure how it would turn out, how this idea of the plywood covering another layer at a certain angle would work in reality. But it all came together exactly as planned. The preparations was essential, checking the plywood thickness, calculating the exact cut angles for the openings, and ensuring that the pattern aligned properly. And the final result, it's totally spectacular. This optical illusion that appears is something unexpected, and at the same time, the materials themselves give a fantastic effect. The wood, the colors, it was all additional coated, covering the entire surface from the front, both to protect it and to enhance its look. Let me know in the comments what do you think about the final result. Like with every project, a good chunk of time has to be spent on packing everything up. Step by step making a custom box, adjusting the packaging to fit the artwork perfectly so that it stays safe and well protected. If you like my piece, don't forget to like the video, leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching, see you on the next one.